In April of 2018, there was one of those rare moments of total bipartisan consensus that ought to make you very nervous. Everybody, Democrats and Republicans, political operatives, the investigative journalists you see on TV, they were all in total agreement on one point. The United States needed to bomb Syria immediately. We needed to hate Syria and its leader, President Bashar al-Assad. Now, they never quite explained why he was so bad. But in April of 2018, they gave us a hint. They told us Assad had targeted his own people with chemical weapons, including chlorine. And for that, we were assured, the United States, along with a coalition of the willing, needed to punish Syria. Now, we raised doubts, obvious ones, about that story at the time. For one thing, there was no evidence that a chlorine gas attack had actually happened. None. At the Pentagon, the defense secretary claimed that there were, quote, a lot of media and social media indicators that either chlorine or sarin was used. Wait a minute, we said, media and social media indicators? You're the military. Shouldn't you have actual evidence? Before we bomb a sovereign country, shouldn't we at least know that they committed the crime we're killing them for? Days after the alleged poison gas attack, we asked that same question on the show. Before we go to war, are we sure all of this is real? Do we really know that Assad was behind the gas attack? It's not a defense of Assad, but it's an obvious question. How could we know that conclusively so soon after the attack happened? So you're not supposed to ask questions like that, super obvious ones like, do we know this really happened? For the crime of asking that question, pretty much every media organization in the country followed the Pentagon's orders and tried to shut us down. Jen Rubin of the Washington Post wrote this, quote, he is insane, meaning this show. Fox News is not a news organization. That is all. Noah Rothman of Commentary called this show nothing less than undiluted Russian propaganda. Because we were defending Assad, who, by the way, saved a huge numbers of Christians in Syria, but we're not allowed to care about that or think it's significant. Anyway, that was the media climate on April 14th, 2018, when the U.S., along with France and the U.K., bombed Syria. Now, a year later, in March of 2019, the world's chemical weapons watchdog weighed in. According to a final report from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, there were, quote, reasonable grounds to conclude that, quote, the use of a toxic chemical as a weapon took place. Now, the Pentagon claimed that that report vindicated their decision to kill people in Syria, something they would go on to do quite a bit more in the future, including just recently under this new administration. But two OPCW investigators who went to Syria, Ian Henderson and Brendan Whelan, objected to that initial report. Now, according to the Courage Foundation, an organization that represents whistleblowers, several former OPCW investigators and high-level officials, and this is fascinating, are calling its conclusions invalid. Specifically, they're alleging that the investigation was scientifically biased, that it was improper, and that it was unethical. And we should be clear about this. These are not partisan actors. These are people who have worked with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons since it was founded. They were involved in developing the protocols and the procedures that the watchdog uses to investigate the use of chemical weapons. One of them, Jose Bustamante, was the first Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. So they're not lightweights. They're not just celebrities weighing in on this. These are people who do it for a living. And according to investigators, officials at the OPCW switched their findings secretly just hours before it was due for publication. The investigators had said there was no evidence of a chemical attack in Syria, but their interim report was edited to state that chlorine gas had in fact been used. Afterward, according to the investigators, OPCW officials continued to compromise the investigation by ignoring scientific procedures and scientific methods as they barreled toward their preconceived conclusion that there had been, in fact, a chemical weapons attack in Syria, and so, of course, the Syrians deserved it. The investigators are now asking for an open forum to fix the errors in report, but they're not getting it. Instead, the OPCW is attacking them in public, and that's what happens when you ask the questions that the people in charge don't want to answer. Now, this isn't just an important issue because of what happened in 2018. If the Pentagon and our media can lie about pretext in order to justify bombing sovereign countries and get away with it, then they will do it again. And that should concern you. Aaron Maté is a journalist with The Gray Zone. He's been covering the story from the very beginning, unlike everyone else, and he joins us tonight to assess. Aaron, thanks so much for coming on. It sounds like they threw this back in the face of certainly of you and of this show. Oh, we were right all along. It sounds like this report really was compromised.
Tucker, first of all, thanks for having me and for covering this global scandal, which has not gotten the attention that it deserves. The facts here are overwhelming. The original OPCW team that went to Syria did not find any evidence of a chemical weapons attack in Douma. They wrote up their findings in a report. That report was suppressed and kept from the public. They were then removed from the investigation and replaced by officials who would never set foot in Syria, who then put out a final report that excluded the key scientific findings of the original team and reached unsupported conclusions. And this is not just an allegation from two whistleblowers, it's documented in a damning series of leaks that have come out. They were given to WikiLeaks. We've gotten some too at the Gray Zone. And they show in great detail what happened here, what a cover-up this was, and anybody can see the facts for themselves. Now, instead of grappling with these facts, the OPCW, as you said, has attacked these whistleblowers. At the UN Security Council, when José Bustani, the former OPCW chief, came to speak out in support of these dissenting inspectors, the US and its allies blocked him from speaking. So when you won't let the actual scientists speak, when you won't let their evidence be weighed, and when you're preventing top officials like Mr. Bustani from speaking at the UN Security Council, it tells you something. It tells you that there's something to hide. It's a cover-up. And that is why this week this letter came out featuring a number of prominent signatories: Daniel Ellsberg, Noam Chomsky, Tulsi Gabbard, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, as well as 5 former OPCW officials calling this out. And the reason why, as you say, these lies can lead to war. We know the consequences from the Iraq War of going to war based on lies. And even now today, these allegations of chemical attacks in Syria are being used to justify the ongoing U.S. military occupation there and the sanctions that are destroying Syria, preventing the import of food and medicine, destroying Syria's economy, preventing it from rebuilding. And that is not good for Syrians. It's not good for Americans. It's only good for warmongers in Washington.
I completely agree. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, why is this left to Aaron Maté in the Gray Zone to report? Where's the New York Times in this? But I'm grateful that you have, and I'm glad you came on tonight. Aaron, thank you.